Many Americans already had the privilege of being remembered by their lives and philosophical contributions. This is especially the case from the Second World War onward. From the 19th century, few names come to mind when philosophy is a subject matter. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the head of the Transcendentalist movement, Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and John Dewey, the heads of pragmatism, maybe Josiah Royce as the head of an idealist version of pragmatism, a branch of pragmatism represented today by Nicholas Rascher. And who else? The light of popular historiography does not penetrate much deeper than this. It only captures those glitzy protrusions in the sands of time. But there is much more. Our philosopher Noah Porter never stood for the glitzy things of philosophy, but rather the commonplaces of every man. His philosophy was the least eccentric, and so was his life, temperament, and religion. But it is in the simplicity of being, in frugality and modesty, that the Christian spirit can be found. It is in this life force that straight thinkers teach the most profound truths of our existence, and with the clearest words. I believe an injustice would be done to Dr. Reverend Porter if no one remembered him and left his memory sink into the deep and dark oceanic trenches of history. I hope his spirit enlivens at the sight of this video, and that we may meet in joy in eternity to come. The story of Noah Porter, like many others, does not start with Noah himself. This is mostly correct. It does not start with our Noah Porter, but with another Noah Porter, his grandfather, a descendant of early New England settlers, namely Robert Porter, who arrived in 1640, an ejected Puritan minister from England. All Porter heads of family were God-fearing and upright farmers of moderate means. Porter bore the same name as his father and grandfather. His father was the only son of a second marriage. He also grew to become a minister in Connecticut. To the likes of his grandfather, the increasing wealth and business of Farmington, Connecticut also brought a like proportion of immorality. To avoid his father to be exposed to the decadence, he moved from his old and habitual homestead to a farm a couple of miles away. His father grew into an intelligent youth, and, when at the right age, was sent to Yale, where his abilities were recognized by the then president. He was invited to stay as a tutor, however the Farmington church lost its minister. He felt the duty of old loyalties and took the mantle. This decision graced him with the opportunity to be with his father until old age and death. He married in 1808, and the third Noah was born in 1811 as second in line. After him, 5 more siblings came into the world, 1 brother and 4 sisters. Although life was simple and rustic, intellectual, affective, and religious stimuli was never amiss. As his father, the young third Noah grew into an intelligent and pious man, traits which were observable since his younger years. With 9 years old, Noah started his learning of Latin, but he also learned Greek and mathematics. He had few friends given his location. His brother Samuel and a handful of other youths were his adventure companions over the Farmington Mountain, the Farmington River, and surrounding meadows. Farmers, blacksmiths, and carpenters made up most of his social world. He also developed a love for gardening, something which accompanied him to the grave, and for domestic animals. From his youth, Noah and his brother Samuel did many chores in the house and barn. His older brother describes him when only a boy as a flimsy and easy to emotional outbreaks when disappointed, crossed, or hurt. This personality trait his sisters do not recognize. He was also timid. Later in years, this trait was tempered by his manly vigor, and his personality was well-rounded, being industrious and progressive, but also prudent and conservative. This vigor, however, did not erase his delicate heart. The most intimate people in his life could still appreciate his tender heart in private, something that was altogether blocked to outsiders of this small circle. His toned-down progressive nature was also noticeable in his later youth. Both Samuel and Noah despised neophilia without falling into antiquarianism. Not too far, the nearest village had a small library. Noah not only devoured books but also attended meetings of older men where they treated the town's day-to-day matters. There he acquainted himself with romantic literature and novels of every stripe. A book especially dear to him and his brother Samuel were Riley's narrative, a harrowing tale of shipwreck on the coast of Africa and perils and suffering in passing over the desert as captives in the hands of Arabs or Moors. Older talks were also attentively listened by Noah when his father had guests. He absorbed conversations about religion, morals, society, and philosophy. At 16, he, like his father, went to Yale. His talents manifested quickly. He made himself into a great scholar. Here he was known by his clearness and precision of thought and speech. He excelled in mathematics, but also in logic. Though radical and revolutionary lines of thought were already traversing the Atlantic and poking hesitantly their heads out in the American soil, the Yale of Noah was still a godly college. Christian faith was ubiquitous, and God was honored morning and evenings at the chapel. Porter was described as eager to attend these corporate devotions in contrast to some of the student body. Noah, as well as the rest of Yale's student body and professors, did not escape the 1830s religious revivals felt in England and Scotland. This was a pouring of the water of life by the Spirit over good seeds, being Noah, son of a pious lineage, one of them, a seed who most surely bore good fruit. After college, Noah became both a tutor in the New Haven Grammar School for 2 years and a student in Divinity School. He was an excellent and solid student, and although agreeing in many things with his professor of theology, he disagreed also and openly. Debate was fostered in that institution. However, Noah was dissatisfied with the heavy insistence on scholastic dispute. All the dry logic chopping and pedantic argumentation will not make a man pious and of profound feelings. The two things ought to be cultivated for proper religious growth. Religiously, for sure, Noah was a man of sentiment. His intellect turned elsewhere for nutrition, the mysteries of the mind and morals. He was disappointed with how psychology and ethics had been conducted. They had little accuracy and definite and distinct statement. However, he found profitable to be acquainted with the historical development of these disciplines. In these imprecisions, Noah could sense, though opaquely, the things the old philosophers were trying to describe and account for. During this period and surroundings, Noah met his theology professor's daughter, Mary Jane Taylor. Their spirits fitted perfectly. This was noticed not only by themselves, but also by friends and family who encouraged the union. They married in April 1836. He was 26 by then. This marriage was to Noah life-changing. His wife was the best of companions, a constant supporter and ever-present counselor. Noah was prone to sadness. He had an air of melancholy to him. This went away gradually with the joyful, high-spirited Mary. His own virility and self-confidence were made brighter by her influence, and she merged deeply with his own scholarly activities, being to him an honest and witty critic of his own work. In 1837, he started his pastoral office, something he did for the next 9 years. 9 years of fruitful and enriching experiences. After that, he came back to the university as a professor of moral philosophy and metaphysics in his alma mater. He was 35 years old. At the time, he had already a small clan of women, his wife and 3 daughters. Porter and the then president, Dr. Theodore Dwight Woolsey, were somewhat the heads of the faculty. They worked in a dynamic of bad cop, good cop. Woolsey inspired a respect which was almost awe. He seldom had occasion to assert his authority. His mere presence was a curb on the most audacious. The frail and slender form, the noble features cast as in some antique mold and worn by studious toil and austere conscience, the piercing black eye, the voice somewhat thin yet firm, all made a great impression on the young imagination. when, as rarely happened, that voice spoke a word of personal reproof, or the eye gave a lightning flash, the culprit wished the earth would open and swallow him. His sway was mild, but there was a sense of volcanic fire not far below the surface. Porter, however, was every student's friend. The rigid barrier which divides or divided students from teachers seemed hardly to exist for him and his pupils. I quote Dr. Munger's testimony. He introduced what may be termed the modern spirit into the relations of the faculty to the students. It was through and in him that the old-time stiffness and dignity and distance were broken down, and the students were admitted into human and friendly relations to their instructors. There was kindness and fidelity enough under the old regime, but no close contact, no interchange or mutuality, and no man-to-man friendliness. Dr. Porter's good sense and modern spirit broke through all this, and led him to put himself in friendly relations to the students with all the traditional dignity and stiffness and distance left out, or exchanged for a hearty and natural greeting, a ready smile, and a certain indefinable air of comradeship. Though a man of modern spirit, Porter was little favorable to changes of method. This was largely because the old methods had never isolated or imprisoned him. His geniality was all-pervasive and irresistible. Its roots lay in the friendliest humanity and a simplicity which was not only indifferent to grades of rank and station, but almost unconscious of them. He met his students on a level because he felt on a level with them. It was the genius of comradeship. This, however, had a downside. Learning was not so efficacious under Porter compared to other sterner professors, something that Porter tried to compensate with some extra individual attention, an extra he gladly offered to his students. Another failing of his mild and friendly manners were his students' behavior. They were, let us say, not the best models of quietness. Porter's affections to his students were not superficial or volatile. He spent 45 years teaching. He had probably about 4,000 students, and he maintained relationships with many of the alumni and showed remarkable memory when remembering their names and personal traits. His students were truly esteemed by him. They were no mere recipients to pour information for a couple of years. As a thinker, Porter never shied away from his orthodoxy in the intellectual wars between Trinitarians and Unitarians. His presence, however, differed from other participants in that, first, he never brought theological disputations into the pulpit. These speculative exercises ought to be circumscribed to men well versed in the field and in specialized journals. He also made himself apart by his frankness and honesty in addressing his rivals' arguments. He was always a gentleman when penning his words. He was kind of a modern Connecticuter version of Melanchthon. To be true, although Porter was more than ready for a disputatio, he was not that interested in it. To him, religion ought to track revelation and stay with it in simple apostolic formulations. He was not of the kind to imagine more than the words allow. These formulations were to be developed and enriched by religious experience, much in the way of old Puritan New Englanders. His spirit was more attracted to its own mysteries. What is the soul? What is the self? What is knowledge? What is the foundation of our beliefs? How does the soul access external reality? By what laws is our soul ruled? Porter, contrary to many of the philosophical minds with a bent to pursue these questions, never fell into corrosive skepticism. He was more of a positive inquirer and never perished to the negative forces, characteristic of the critical method. As in theology, Porter abhorred additions of the fancy whenever subjects of inquiry got too abstruse and dark to probe further. He was annoyed also by vagueness of expression, but he had no sympathies for excessive dissection either. It invariably ends in cutting all anchors to reality and allows skeptics, in place of surer grounds, speculate the most extravagant reveries, just like the more imaginative poetic thinkers. He was one of those philosophers who subject the mind to an analysis not only fearless, but as far as possible definite and exact, and find in it a real knowledge, under laws capable of some precision of statement. Of this philosophy, a leading branch has been that known as the Scotch School, and with that school Dr. Porter was in a large degree in sympathy. Porter was also a supernaturalist with a spiritual and theistic view of man. He opposed both the material and agnostic tendencies of his day. He knew not his philosophical enemies only through the books. Porter traveled to Europe and stayed there for 6 months, both in Britain and in German provinces. He was constantly occupied with debates, seminars, and lectures in local universities. It was in this moment that disaster struck his family. The ills that affected his wife till old age and took his daughter's life at 16 years old arrived. But now, let us take a closer look into Porter's realm of ideas. We are not going to take the route of history here. We will focus only in his more mature intellectual developments. Porter was a psychologist from psychologism. He believed many things have to be traced back to the knowledge of mind to be properly accounted for. A scientific study of the mind, he insists, is the only proper introduction to the profound questions concerning the origin and destiny of man, the metaphysics of nature, and the existence and nature of the Absolute. Turn to whatever subject you will, you are led back to questions concerning the knowing subject, the nature, the reach, and the certainty of the knowing act. No maxim, he writes, deserves to be recorded by the student of philosophy in letters more clear and bright than this. The man who seeks to enter the temple of philosophy by any other approach than the vestibule of psychology can never penetrate into its inner sanctuary. Porter also believed that the psychology ought to be procured by Baconian inductivism, and not by deduction from a metaphysical system, or by calquing methods and theories from the physical sciences. Porter, contrasting himself with many of the philosophies of old continental Europe, was an epistemically or gnoseologically oriented philosopher. First philosophy was first and foremost not being qua being, as the Latin Church Peripatetics would say, but being qua knowledge, that is, the study of existence, or what there is, in the light of or under the premises of knowledge. This means, to Porter, we cannot simply jump to metaphysics and start speculating wildly what there is and isn't. We must have a reasonable grasp of what is knowledge and how our cognitive apparatus produces such. Porter's answer to this was that knowledge is an activity of the mind. We develop, strive toward, work to knowledge. It is an activity of the soul. In knowing, we are not so much recipients as actors. We do not merely submit to the impressions which are made upon the senses or the mind from without. Nor are we the passive subjects of the mechanical operations of ideas already acquired, as they come and go by an independent force and movement of their own, as they intrude, break upon, or elude the memory and fancy in seeming caprice or wantonness. We do not generalize reason or belief according as certain relations do or do not choose to suggest themselves. But in all states of knowledge, the soul itself energizes or acts in the ways or methods which are provided for by its original endowments. Porter also denied the account of knowledge as gradual composition of simple ideas into more complex ones. He writes, "The mind does not find itself in possession of its materials. It knows not how, as the contents of the mind, as impressions or ideas, nor even as relations, and then proceed to compound them into knowledge. But it finds things or entities in combination or related together, and proceeds subsequently to decompose them into ideas and to express these ideas in language. So it is of all experiences or mental activities. They are known to exist, and not only are known to exist, but to exist in relations to one another." Further, knowledge is just the subjective counterpart of reality. That is, knowledge is certainty of what is real. Not certainty as a mere belief, feeling towards a proposition, but gnoseological certainty towards a proposition, a state of mind such that that which is under consideration corresponds with reality. Concerning morals, Porter defined moral philosophy or ethics as that which defines, regulates, and enforces duty. He adds that this field does not aim at proving the existence of duties and rights, but presupposes them, and simply pursues proper systematization for our speculations concerning them. Duty to him is an action or a collection of actions which ought to be done. In the abstract, it is the quality or relation which is common to and distinguishes such actions, where action designates both outer and inner human activities. In modern normative ethics typology, Porter would be classified as a deontologist. He distinguishes moral science proper from ethics. The latter pertains to classified rules of practice, while the other to fundamental general principles. Ethics then depends on the findings of moral science proper. Finally, Porter was a common sensist or a Scotch philosopher. He believed that humanity has a common sense, that is, a foundational set of principles that make any belief or knowledge possible, such as that of dualism, that is, duality of substance, mental stuff, and material stuff, the existence of an I, an ego, or that things relate. He also expounded a peculiar trait of common sensism, that of perceptual realism, that is, that our cognitive apparatus is capable of perceiving reality, not in an omniscient way, but in a particient way, that is, we can perceive reality as it is in some of its properties, but not all of its properties. After this synoptic flight over Porter's thinking, we land again in his life. Porter's older years after retirement were exceedingly pleasant. He and his family always had things to do and amuse themselves. However, Mary's ills were getting the best of her, weakening her week after week. Finally, in 1888, Mary died, and Porter was not the same man until his death. His friends described him as trying to force himself on living, but his physical strength was fading away, and dependent amusements narrowed down. He could not write for loss of dexterity, he could not teach for loss of strong voice, he could not row his small boat for loss of mobility and bodily strength. His mind, though, was always trying to surpass the physical limitations, always curious and with insightful and intelligent remarks to be expressed in a tired, laconic fashion. In 1892, he knew his death was near. He called his daughters to say his last words. Life was slipping away. He asked for his daughters to wake up their mother. This was how much Porter loved Mary. An atheist would say he reified his wife into existence. Christians would say he got a glimpse of his wife when approaching the gates of eternity to New Jerusalem.